Tonight I stand before you to speak to the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who have learned how to smile in public while carrying unanswered prayers in private. I am not here for the crowd that needs noise to feel alive. I am here for the soul that has been learning how to breathe in silence. Some of you have been asking a dangerous question lately. Not dangerous because it is wrong. Dangerous because it is honest. Why am I alone when I did everything right? Why did the circle get smaller when my heart got bigger? Why did the doors close just when I finally learned how to knock? And I need you to hear me with more than your ears tonight. Not every separation is rejection. Not every ending is punishment. Not every lonely season is loss. Sometimes it is preparation wearing the clothes of pain. There are moments when heaven steps into your life so quietly that you mistake it for abandonment. There are moments when God moves people away from you not because you are unworthy of love, but because you are too valuable to be shaped by the wrong hands. You call it isolation. He calls it protection. You call it emptiness. He calls it space. You call it silence. He calls it instruction. Some of you have been chosen for a work that could not survive constant applause. Some of you have been marked for an assignment that would collapse under too many opinions. Some of you carry something sacred inside you, and sacred things cannot be passed around casually. God isolates the chosen because noise is generous with confusion, but silence is faithful to clarity. Let me tell you something you were never taught to celebrate. Your loneliness has been intelligent. It removed distractions you were not strong enough to resist yet. It dismantled relationships you were still emotionally dependent on. It closed mouths that would have misnamed what God was building in you. You think you lost people. No. You outgrew rooms that could no longer hold your future. There is a reason your phone stopped ringing. There is a reason invitations slowly disappeared. There is a reason the familiar laughter faded into polite distance. It is not because you became difficult. It is because you became different. And difference is uncomfortable for anyone who benefits from your former version. You see, when God begins to elevate a soul, He first teaches it how to stand alone without collapsing into bitterness. Because the work ahead will require strength that cannot be borrowed from companionship. Some of you are about to lead. Some of you are about to create. Some of you are about to heal others with wounds you had to learn how to survive. But leadership that is born in crowds often dies in pressure. Purpose that grows in comfort rarely survives conflict. So God removes the cushion. He removes the constant validation. He removes the background noise of approval. Not to break you, but to teach you where your true voice lives. In the quiet. That is where you learned how to hear your own thoughts without apologizing for them. That is where you learned how to sit with disappointment without running back to what hurt you just because it felt familiar. That is where you learned how to stay when nobody was clapping. Chosen people are not shaped by popularity. They are shaped by endurance. Some of you were isolated because your compassion was being exploited. Your kindness was being borrowed without permission. Your emotional labor was being spent on people who never intended to grow with you. You were becoming tired in places that never planned to water you. So God stepped in and said, "Enough. Enough explaining yourself. Enough shrinking so others can feel taller. Enough saving people who refuse to save themselves. Enough bleeding quietly for relationships that would not even bandage you publicly. You were isolated so you could finally learn the difference between loyalty and self-abandonment. That lesson is not gentle. It is holy. There are certain patterns that can only be broken when the audience is removed. There are certain addictions to approval that can only be healed when affirmation disappears. There are certain fears that only lose their power when you stop performing bravery for other people and start practicing it in private. God isolates the chosen because performance cannot replace alignment. Some of you are living beautifully misdirected lives. Busy, useful, helpful, respected, but not aligned. So He dismantled your schedule. He disrupted your routine. He interrupted your sense of certainty. Because a comfortable life in the wrong direction is still a tragedy. You did not lose momentum. You were redirected. And redirection often feels like delay when you cannot yet see the map. You see, isolation is where motives are purified. When nobody is watching, you discover why you truly do what you do. When nobody is praising you, you learn whether you still believe in the work. When nobody is depending on you emotionally, you finally confront the parts of yourself you avoided by staying busy for everyone else. Chosen people are taught how to face themselves before they are trusted to influence others. And let me speak gently to the wound that some of you hide behind spiritual language. Not everyone who leaves your life was sent by God, but God is powerful enough to use even painful exits to protect your future. Some departures were not divine plans. They were human decisions. But divine wisdom still knows how to rearrange the aftermath. The betrayal that taught you boundaries. The rejection that revealed your voice. The misunderstanding that forced you to stop explaining your worth to people committed to misinterpreting you. God isolates the chosen because clarity does not survive chaos. You cannot hear your calling over constant conflict. You cannot feel your intuition when you are emotionally overwhelmed by other people's expectations. You cannot learn your own rhythm while dancing to everybody else's tempo. Isolation is not absence, it is alignment. It is the space where your soul stops echoing other voices and starts recognizing its own. Some of you were isolated because you were becoming dangerous to small systems. Your questions were getting sharper. Your boundaries were getting firmer. Your courage was no longer asking permission. And insecure environments do not celebrate individuals who think independently. They prefer predictable silence. So God moved you away before your spirit learned how to suffocate politely. You were isolated because you were not designed to fit comfortably into limited thinking. Chosen people are not rebellious by nature. They are obedient to something deeper than popularity. Let me tell you what isolation builds. It builds emotional literacy. It teaches you how to sit with discomfort without medicating it with distraction. It teaches you how to grieve without letting grief become your identity. It teaches you how to wait without losing your dignity. Waiting is not passive when you are chosen. It is active refinement. While others are rushing toward visibility, you are being trained for stability. While others are collecting attention, you are collecting wisdom. While others are learning how to be seen, you are learning how to endure being misunderstood without becoming resentful. Some of you were isolated because your next level requires discernment that only silence can teach. Not every opportunity deserves your energy. Not every invitation deserves your presence. Not every platform deserves your voice. Discernment is developed in rooms where there is no applause to distract you from your intuition. God isolates the chosen because fame without grounding becomes self-destruction. And yes, some of you were isolated because your heart needed healing before your hands were trusted with greater responsibility. Unhealed pain does not disappear when success arrives. It simply gains a louder stage. So God slowed you down. He gave you time to notice your triggers. He gave you time to examine your patterns. He gave you time to recognize the ways you learned to survive that are no longer allowed to lead your future. You were isolated to unlearn survival and relearn safety. Chosen people are not spared suffering. They are taught how to transform it. Let me say something that may challenge the way you see your struggle. If God wanted to use you only as you are right now, you would not need this season. But because what is coming requires a deeper self-awareness, a stronger emotional spine, and a quieter ego, you were given space to grow into the person who can carry what is being prepared. Isolation is not punishment, it is training. Some of you were isolated because your voice is going to carry weight one day, and heavy words require light ego. You cannot speak healing into broken spaces if you are still addicted to being admired. You cannot hold leadership if you still collapse under criticism. You cannot build something lasting if your identity is fragile. So God introduced you to yourself, without filters, without distractions, without performance. You learned how to regulate your emotions without external rescue. You learned how to calm your nervous system without another person's reassurance. You learned how to make decisions without polling the room. That is not loneliness. That is leadership in private. Some of you were isolated because you were too generous with your future. You told people your dreams before they had earned access to your vulnerability. You shared your vision with those who only knew how to measure you by your past. You gave emotional access to people who had not yet demonstrated emotional responsibility. So God taught you holy discretion, not secrecy rooted in fear, but privacy rooted in wisdom, not hiding your light, but protecting the flame while it grows. Chosen people do not announce every move. They move quietly until integrity has built the foundation. Some of you were isolated because your next environment is different from your current comfort. You cannot transition into a new atmosphere while emotionally anchored to an old identity. So God gently loosened your attachments, not to make you cold, but to make you free. Free from the pressure to remain relatable when you are being called to be responsible. Free from the guilt of growing when others choose stagnation. Free from the emotional contract that says you must stay small so others do not feel left behind. Growth does not betray anyone. It only reveals who is committed to walking with you rather than benefiting from you. God isolates the chosen because dependence can quietly replace devotion. If your peace depends on another person's consistency, you are vulnerable to emotional collapse. If your confidence depends on public approval, you are vulnerable to manipulation. If your purpose depends on constant affirmation, you are vulnerable to burnout. So God teaches you how to stand, not with arrogance, with grounding, not with detachment, with discernment. Some of you were isolated because you needed to forgive without reconciliation. That is a hard lesson. You needed to release resentment without reopening access. You needed to grieve what could not be fixed without returning to what was harmful. You needed to accept that love does not always include proximity. Isolation gave you the courage to close doors softly without slamming your dignity. Chosen people are not bitter. They are boundaried. Some of you were isolated because your emotional world was crowded. You were carrying other people's trauma as if it were your responsibility to resolve it. You were absorbing emotional chaos as if empathy required self-erasure. You were confusing compassion with constant availability. So God cleared the room, not because you lack love, but because you deserve rest. And let me speak to the fear that whispers late at night. What if I stay like this forever? You will not. But you will never again be the version of you who was afraid to be alone with their own mind. This season is not permanent. It is precise. It is measured. It is intentional. You are being positioned, not isolated from life, but isolated for life. For the life you are about to step into with clarity instead of confusion, with discernment instead of desperation, with self-respect instead of emotional negotiation. God isolates the chosen because they are about to become environments for others. Your presence will become safe for someone one day. Your words will become stabilizing for someone one day. Your story will become permission for someone one day. But before you become shelter, you must learn how to build internal structure. Shelter without structure collapses in storms. So you learned how to hold yourself together without applause. You learned how to choose integrity when nobody would ever know the difference. You learned how to stay kind without needing credit. You learned how to walk away without needing the last word. That is spiritual strength. Some of you were isolated because your relationship with God needed to become personal, not inherited. Not second-hand faith, not borrowed language, not recycled inspiration, but a living conversation. Isolation stripped away the noise until you could finally hear what was always trying to reach you beneath your fear. And in that quiet, you learned that God is not impressed by your business. He is moved by your honesty. You learned that you do not need to perform spirituality to be spiritually alive. You only need willingness. Some of you were isolated because your heart was learning how to trust again. Trust not in people. Trust in timing. Trust in redirection. Trust in the slow unfolding of things that do not arrive on demand. You learned how to release control without losing commitment. You learned how to hope without clinging. You learned how to move forward without needing guarantees. That is chosen resilience. And now, standing here with you, I want you to hear this not as poetry, but as permission. Your isolation was not an accident. It was a necessary interruption, a sacred pause, a recalibration, a quiet rescue. The room emptied because your life was about to become fuller. The noise faded because your clarity was about to become louder. The distance appeared because your direction was about to become undeniable. So if you are in that season right now, do not rush your escape. Listen, learn. Let the silence finish its work, because when you step back into the world, you will not be searching for belonging. You will be carrying presence. You will not be begging for space. You will be creating it. You will not be explaining who you are becoming. Your life will speak with calm authority. God isolates the chosen not to make them lonely, but to make them unshakable. There comes a moment in every life when the crowd that once surrounded you begins to thin, not because you failed them, not because you changed your heart, but because something in you began to rise that could no longer be carried by familiar hands. And in that moment you start to discover one of the most misunderstood truths of faith and destiny. God teaches you how to stand alone before he ever trusts you to lead others. I am speaking to the one who kept showing up, even when nobody noticed, to the one who stayed faithful when recognition never arrived, to the one who learned how to keep walking after the applause stopped. Some of you are in a season that feels unfair, quiet, slow, and strangely empty. You keep asking yourself why your life became so still right when you finally felt ready to move. You wonder why your circle grew smaller just when your courage grew stronger. You replay conversations in your mind, searching for the moment you became too much, or not enough, or somehow different. But hear me clearly tonight. Standing alone is not abandonment. Standing alone is training. Before God places influence in your hands, he places solitude in your life. Before he allows your words to carry weight in other people's hearts, he teaches you how to carry your own heart without leaning on someone else to stabilize you. Because leadership is not built on charisma. It is built on emotional independence. It is built on inner stability. It is built on the ability to remain anchored when no one is validating your choices. Many people want to lead. Very few are willing to be stripped of emotional crutches. You see, when people are constantly around you, they become mirrors that tell you who you are supposed to be. Their reactions shape your tone. Their expectations shape your decisions. Their approval becomes a quiet authority over your confidence. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop listening to your own discernment and start managing your image. So God removes the mirrors, not because he wants you insecure, but because he wants you free, free from performing strength, free from borrowing courage, free from building identity out of other people's responses. Standing alone is where you meet your unedited self. It is where you discover what you actually believe when nobody is clapping for your convictions. It is where you discover what kind of character you have when nobody is watching you make the right choice. It is where you discover whether your faith survives without an audience. God will never allow you to lead people if you still require people to regulate your self-worth. Some of you were very capable, very gifted, very intelligent, and very kind, but emotionally dependent. You needed reassurance too often. You needed harmony too badly. You needed everyone to be okay with you before you could be okay with yourself. That does not make you weak. It makes you human. But leadership requires a different emotional architecture. When God teaches you to stand alone, he begins to quietly rebuild your inner structure. He teaches you how to stay grounded when misunderstood. He teaches you how to remain gentle without becoming fragile. He teaches you how to be decisive without becoming defensive. Because one day, people will follow you. And when they do, they will bring their fears with them. They will bring their confusion with them. They will bring their projections, their disappointment, their emotional chaos, and their unhealed expectations. If you cannot stand steady in your own emotional weather, you will be swept away by the storms of everyone else. Standing alone is not about isolation from humanity. It is about independence from emotional instability. Some of you were removed from certain friendships not because those people were evil, but because you were learning how to outsource your peace. You were learning how to hand your emotional temperature to whoever was closest to you. If they were happy, you were light. If they were distant, you collapsed. If they were uncertain, you panicked. If they were disappointed, you doubted your calling. So God created distance, not to hurt you, to heal your internal boundaries. Leadership does not begin with authority. It begins with self-regulation. Standing alone teaches you how to sit with your own discomfort without immediately fixing it through distraction, conversation, or emotional dependence. It teaches you how to stay present with uncertainty without rushing into decisions just to escape anxiety. That skill is rare. That skill is sacred. That skill is necessary, because the future you are being prepared for will require you to hold tension without reacting impulsively. Some of you were used to always being needed. You were the helper, the rescuer, the emotional first responder. You felt valuable when someone else was falling apart. You felt significant when you could fix what others broke. And in that role, you built an identity around usefulness instead of alignment. So God stepped in and disrupted your access. Not because you stopped caring, but because you were learning to disappear inside other people's emergencies. Standing alone teaches you how to belong to yourself again. It teaches you how to hear your own exhaustion before someone else's crisis. It teaches you how to recognize your own limits without apologizing for them. It teaches you how to love without overextending your nervous system. Because leadership is not about sacrificing your life for every request. It is about stewarding your energy for what truly matters. Before God allows you to carry responsibility for others, He teaches you how to carry responsibility for yourself. Some of you are deeply spiritual, deeply compassionate, deeply intuitive, and deeply tired. And you were tired not because you lacked strength, but because you lacked boundaries. Standing alone introduces you to the courage of saying no without explaining yourself. It teaches you how to disappoint people without betraying your integrity. It teaches you how to let others misunderstand your silence without turning your life into a defense speech. When you learn how to stand alone, you stop negotiating your values for acceptance. That is leadership. God will never trust you to guide others if you are still guided by the need to be liked. Some of you were isolated because your voice was becoming too honest for certain environments. Your questions were becoming too clear. Your perspective was no longer convenient. You could no longer pretend that dysfunction was normal just because it was familiar. And the moment you stopped blending in emotionally, you stood out energetically. Standing alone teaches you how to survive emotional discomfort without compromising your truth. Because in leadership, truth will not always be welcomed. Sometimes it will be resisted. Sometimes it will be misunderstood. Sometimes it will be lonely. And if loneliness still terrifies you, you will soften your message to protect your belonging. God teaches you how to stand alone so your voice does not become fragile when your message becomes necessary. Some of you were separated from people who once shaped your confidence. They were your emotional anchors, your sounding boards, your reassurance, your safe place to fall. And when those relationships changed or ended, it felt like the ground beneath you shifted. But what actually happened is that God was transferring your stability from people to purpose. Standing alone is where your center of gravity moves. You stop asking, who agrees with me? You start asking, what aligns with truth? You stop asking, will they understand? You start asking, is this right for my calling? You stop asking, will this keep me connected? You start asking, will this keep me honest? Leadership is built on internal alignment, not external consensus. God will not allow your confidence to be borrowed. He teaches you how to generate it from obedience. Standing alone teaches you how to trust your discernment when there is no confirmation. That is a terrifying place at first. You second-guess yourself. You replay decisions. You wonder if you are imagining the calling, exaggerating the vision, misreading the signs. You question whether the discomfort is growth or mistake. But slowly, quietly, something begins to settle inside you. You learn how to recognize the calm of alignment. You learn how to distinguish fear from intuition. You learn how to hear correction without collapsing into shame. You learn how to hold responsibility without resenting it. Standing alone is where emotional maturity is formed. Some of you were isolated because your emotional reactions were still too loud to hear God clearly. You were reacting before reflecting, defending before discerning, explaining before understanding, and your life was full of movement but empty of clarity. So God slowed your environment down. He simplified your social world. He reduced the emotional noise, not to make you lonely, but to make you attentive. Leadership requires listening more than speaking. Standing alone teaches you how to listen to what is beneath your reactions. It teaches you how to recognize when your frustration is actually grief, when your anger is actually fear, when your disappointment is actually unspoken expectation. And when you learn how to navigate your own emotional layers, you become safer for others to navigate theirs. God teaches you to stand alone because emotional leadership cannot be learned in emotional dependence. Some of you were used to processing everything out loud. Every thought needed confirmation. Every idea needed validation. Every doubt needed reassurance. And when you were finally left with your own mind, your own silence, your own uncertainty, it felt uncomfortable. But that discomfort is where discernment grows. Standing alone teaches you how to think before you speak. It teaches you how to sit with complexity without oversimplifying reality to feel better. It teaches you how to carry unresolved questions without forcing premature answers. Leadership is not certainty. It is steadiness in uncertainty. God teaches you how to stand alone so you do not panic when you cannot control outcomes. Some of you are being prepared for spaces where your decisions will affect other people's lives, their livelihoods, their emotional well-being, their sense of direction. You cannot carry that responsibility if you still collapse when you are criticized. Standing alone teaches you how to receive feedback without losing your identity. It teaches you how to accept correction without self-destruction. It teaches you how to stay open without becoming defenseless. Because leadership will expose your imperfections publicly. And if you have not learned how to sit with your imperfections privately, you will either hide behind perfectionism or retreat into isolation out of shame. God teaches you how to stand alone so you can stand exposed without breaking. Some of you were isolated because your emotional world needed healing before your influence expanded. Unhealed pain will leak into leadership. Unresolved resentment will shape your decisions. Unacknowledged insecurity will distort your authority. Standing alone forces you to face your patterns. Why do you overwork? Why do you avoid conflict? Why do you crave approval? Why do you fear stillness? You cannot heal what you keep distracting yourself from. God isolates you so you can finally listen to what your own soul has been trying to say beneath the noise. Standing alone is where self-honesty becomes unavoidable. And self-honesty is the foundation of ethical leadership. Some of you were removed from communities that once defined you. And without those labels, without those roles, without those expectations, you felt strangely empty. But that emptiness was not loss. It was space. Space for identity to emerge without pressure. Standing alone teaches you who you are when you are not needed, not praised, not consulted, not depended on. It teaches you that your worth does not rise and fall with productivity. Leadership that is rooted in worthiness instead of usefulness does not exploit people. God teaches you how to stand alone so you do not build systems that drain others the way you once drained yourself. Some of you were isolated because your heart was too open in environments that were not safe. You shared too much too soon. You trusted too quickly. You confused emotional intensity with emotional depth. Standing alone teaches you discernment in intimacy. It teaches you how to open your life slowly, how to let trust be built, not rushed. How to recognize consistency over charisma. Leadership without relational discernment becomes vulnerable to manipulation. God teaches you how to stand alone so your compassion becomes wise, not reckless. Some of you were isolated because your future environment requires a stronger emotional spine. You will be challenged. You will be disagreed with. You will be misunderstood. You will be evaluated. You will be stretched. And if your identity is still fragile, you will internalize every critique as rejection. Standing alone teaches you how to separate feedback from self-worth. It teaches you how to grow without collapsing into comparison. It teaches you how to celebrate others without diminishing yourself. Leadership that is free from envy becomes generous with opportunity. God teaches you how to stand alone so you can create space for others instead of competing for it. Some of you were isolated because your relationship with God needed to become direct, not filtered through mentors, not inherited from family, not copied from community. Standing alone is where faith becomes personal, where prayer becomes conversation instead of performance, where silence becomes sanctuary instead of emptiness. Leadership that is rooted in personal conviction does not rely on borrowed language. God teaches you how to stand alone so your faith becomes resilient instead of reactive. Some of you are in this season right now. You feel disconnected, not broken, just quiet, not lost, just still, not abandoned, just recalibrated, and you keep wondering when life will begin again. But life is not paused, it is refining. You are being trained to carry emotional responsibility without emotional collapse. You are being trained to walk into uncertainty without losing clarity. You are being trained to remain kind without becoming soft on your boundaries. You are being trained to speak with courage without becoming defensive. You are being trained to lead without needing permission. God teaches you to stand alone, because leadership begins long before anyone follows you. It begins when you choose integrity without witnesses, when you choose patience without reward, when you choose obedience without applause, when you choose growth without guarantee, when you choose truth without protection, when you choose to stay rooted even when nobody is watching how well you stand.